All right. Welcome.
Welcome. Hi, everybody.
Hey, Anne.
Okay, so welcome everyone to Grace Between Races. This is our seventh gathering with our guest speaker, Opeyemi, and we're so happy to have her here today. And welcome to everyone else who is here to share, to listen, to bring your presence here with us today. Thank you very much. So um, I would start by saying let's take some deep breaths together before I get into the guidelines and intro and all of that. So just quiet yourself and take a few deep breaths. You could close your eyes. You could count for 4 in and hold for 2 and out for 4. And when you finish, you can open your eyes. And again, welcome everybody. I'm happy to have you here. Um, we know that Grace Between Races is a gathering. We hold space for raw, honest conversations where we can express our experiences about inequalities between races and how we are affected by it. Um, our vision and
Excuse me,
intention.
can you make it a little bit louder, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. Our vision and intention is to look at ways in which we can create. Is this better? Is it better? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Ways which we can create change, the kind of changes that our future generations will live more harmoniously with each other and with Mother Earth, understanding the oneness of all. And we say it's about race, but the thing is, we know that race issues run across the human experience, and it affects every aspect of life, and so therefore we are open to discussing all aspects of life that may or may not seem to be connected, but there's always a connection, okay, because everything is connected. So I'll just read out the guidelines. This gathering is all inclusive. We speak from our heart and with our experiences. We honor one another's truth. We should be encouraging and supportive of others' truth as well. We should be mindful of time and be open to receive feedback. And of course, with all of this, we come here in the spirit of finding resolution, reconciliation. Therefore, when things come up for us, we need to address it. Sometimes, perhaps internally at first, but if there's a way to share it, of course, we are open to have this, we are holding this safe space for that kind of dialogue, to be respectful of each other's experiences and all of that. So welcome everybody, and let's have some lightness with it. As much as heavy as it is, let's open our hearts and dive in. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anne. It's always helpful and grounding to hear that at the beginning. Yeah, and I'm so thrilled to be here with Opeyemi.
In the same room.
Same room, because my computer died.
And my computer died.
Interesting
Wow.
weeks after Mickey sharing with us.
Interesting marriage.
Yeah. Anyways, that was our last conversation, and now we're having to build deeper relationships.
There you go. And we're talking about how to deal with stress in the moment.
Exactly. So I'm going to invite us to actually see the talking stick this time, because I don't have the slide because we're on our friend's computer at her house. And so we're still going to have the talking stick with us, and we can go back and forth with it, and I'll pass it to you through the ethers, Anne, as well. And I want to honor the walking in balance training that I did with Strong Oak, and that this is a native practice that was taught to me by Strong Oak as a local native teacher, and that we're practicing that to some extent together. And it's a different version given we're online, and we're inviting our friends to tell their story and to speak for the majority of the time. So also I want to honor the ancestors of the land where we are, which is in East Hampton, and I believe it is the Nunatak people here, and as well as the Nipmuc in this local area, and possibly the Abenaki as well. And I invite you to breathe into and honor the land where you are and the ancestors of that land wherever you are, and whatever their languages and their names are as well. And may their cultures continue to flourish, and may we continue to learn from them. And also, I want to invite us to honor our own ancestors, those who are with us in spirit, and those who have brought us to where we are today. May we acknowledge that we are all healing together. We are all growing together. Thank you. And also, I want to acknowledge all of our guides and the benefactors who have supported us to be here as well, known and unknown, seen and unseen, and whatever that means for you as an individual in your life. May we thank those who are supporting us and guiding us. So then I invite us to get a little bit more grounded in this moment, to find a seated position that supports you, to drop in a little bit more deeply, and to feel into how you are resting into this place. Noticing your sits bones and your feet possibly on the ground. And also noticing your breathing. Receiving on the in-breath, noticing all of your experience, and releasing down through your connection to the chair or the seat or the floor in which you are on. Releasing into the earth, letting go, honoring all sounds, all thoughts, all sensations, receiving it and letting it go into the earth. And I invite us to also breathe roots into the earth beneath us. Whatever may be distracting us or challenging for us in this moment, knowing that we have this connection to the earth, that we can breathe into, breathe down into, and breathe up from, to breathe in that nourishment into our bodies, to fill us with new nourishment, new possibilities, new hope for life. And continuing to breathe out whatever we're ready to release and let go of. And continuing to breathe in the nourishment of the earth. And I invite us to breathe that nourishment into all parts of our body. Invite us to bring in any movement that might support us, to feel that nourishment spreading throughout us. Acknowledging that we are resilient in our relationship to the earth. And then also to bring our awareness up to the crown of our head, and whatever opening we're present to up there, and to receive blessings from the sky, down through the top of our head into our bodies, filling us with blessings of warmth and light. However you receive those blessings, allowing them to pass through us and to pass in to the earth as well. And noticing what it feels like to have this blessing of the sky mixed with the blessing of the earth, and the support of the earth within us. Trusting that we are held as conduits of truth, coming together to be together in our stories. Blessed be.
Blessed be.
Thank you. And I want to invite us to actually go around and say our names before we do a little sharing from Anne and then introduction. Oh, well, we did a little different this time than the plan, but that's okay. So I invite you one by one to come off mute, or you can all come off mute if you can make sure there's not so much background noise, and to share your name and your intention for being here tonight. Oh, did we lose Anne? Where did she go? Huh. Well, hopefully Anne will come back and join us sometime soon. But I invite you to share in the meantime.
My name's Jerry. I'm here for learning and listening, and I'm grateful to Hillary and Anne for creating this space. I look forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Jerry.
I'm Laurie, and Opeyemi's workshops, I always love them. So that's why I'm here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Laurie.
I'm Carrie, and dismantling white supremacy is really important to me, and I'm just always looking for more ways to understand myself and others and take action in the world. And so this is sharing stories and listening is a great way to do that for me.
Thanks, Carrie.
This is Prakash. It's my first time here, although I've known Opeyemi and Hillary for many years. And so I'm really excited to learn and listen. And racial justice has been an important part of my life and my family for a long time. 5 daughters, 4 women, and 8 grandsons, all boys and young men and adults of color. So it's just intrinsic, but also something I'm always wanting to learn more about. I took part in the weekend workshop a few weeks ago through the Sojourner Truth School on showing up whole for racial justice. That was very inspiring in 2 days. So looking forward to learning. Since I haven't been here before, I think I'll first listen and get an idea of what I can share, what I have to offer. So first I want to just learn and listen. Thank you.
Thanks, Prakash.
I can go next. This is Bill, and I'm also going by Sage. And I'm thank you to Hillary and Anne for hosting this, and to Opeyemi for sharing. And I have been on a journey of greater understanding of racial awareness and racial challenges. About a decade and a half ago, I went to an Undoing Racism workshop in Florence as part of the Valley Free Radio board. We did that as a board, and that was the first significant raising of consciousness beyond my just generic consciousness. And it's an issue that I invest my time in other parallel pursuits, and I don't have as much time to spend focusing on this, but I'm moving to Springfield shortly that has greater diversity, cultural diversity, and so I'm looking forward to that. So I'm also outside right now in Northampton, so I may be going on both mute and turning my video off periodically, and may not be able to stay the whole time depending on my situation. So I'm in.
Great, thanks for letting us know, Sage or Bill, or both beings in one body. And I haven't heard from Anne yet, but I might text a little bit with her just to see if we can connect, but for some reason my phone is not letting me do that.
So she asked me to explain my name. Would this be a good time to do that while you're trying to do the texting?
Yeah, actually, well, I actually will just introduce you now,
Okay.
and then you can go ahead and do all of that. So not that you need an introduction, but
yeah.
I just am so grateful that we're actually having this conversation, because since I met you, which I think was probably at Mandala Dance, I don't know, and I have to be totally honest and say I was actually terrified of you. Yeah. And I think a lot of people are, because you're so powerful.
I was hoping that we could get that right in the room right away. Yeah.
And it took me years of like working through my own stuff to show up and be like, this woman is amazing, and I just want to know her better and be able to hold space for you to share your story. And I didn't even know you were a ceremonialist. I didn't know these things about you, and and I wouldn't have known unless I had asked.
Yes,
really. So I'm really grateful that we're doing this, and I know a little bit about your past and being a doctor and all that awakening brought to you. I can only imagine, and I'm really fascinated to hear about how you came to doing the decolonization work and stepping into where you are now and being a free-flying agent.
A free-flying itinerant community organizer up and down the Connecticut River Valley at this point. Yeah.
So thank you. Yeah. It's an honor.
So should we just go ahead and
Yeah.
I'm going to share my story. And who's next is for?
That might be Anne, but I'm not sure. Or maybe not. Or it might just be someone. Do you want to share whoever Nexus 4 is about who you are and your intention for being here? Maybe not. Okay.
They might need to press the unmute button.
Yeah, maybe I don't have a choice to unmute you, so you might be muted, but it doesn't look like you are. No. Okay, well, I think moving ahead is...
Moving right along.
Yeah.
My name is important because I was born Camilla Marie Brown, and that's my father's last name is Brown. And my mother was a Parham with 3 sisters, and they all married, and therefore there were no more Parhams. So when I was in college, I changed my name before I got my college degree. And then I had this really amazing experience in 2005, which really made me go out and say, I need a new name to go along with a new phase of my life. And I went to a woman I had known for many years who was a practitioner of Yoruba's Ifa. It's an indigenous pagan tradition of West Africa. And she is an African-American slave descent woman who went back to Nigeria to be initiated. She found me a name. I said I wanted a name that expressed gratitude. So the name translates, I am eternally grateful. And if you look it up, be careful because you need my last name too, because there's a lot of Opeyemis in Yoruba culture. And one of them is very famous and is a Nollywood star, which is like Bollywood and Hollywood, but for Nigeria. Mm-hmm. So she's a Nollywood star. Mm-hmm. So without my last name, you may get her instead. So.
Thank you.
I'm not going to hold the talking stick while I speak, but I hope that what we are going to have is, through my personal life story, a better understanding of healthcare issues, of wellness and health in America. And when Hillary speaks of decolonizing the mind, this is a new way of talking about what we're going to need to really let go of some bad habits and some chronic patterns and move forward together. So grace between the races has to start with acknowledging how bad it can get. So I hope that my life story is interesting and entertaining. And I was so glad Hillary mentioned I was afraid of you, because in my 20 years of the ecstatic dance community, I think I have been all over the place, and where I am right now is very much in my own space with my authentic self, and it's big. Mm-hmm. And I don't choose to tone police down anymore, and I don't choose to dance with people and smile anymore. So it can come off as intimidating, since one of the stereotypes about Black women to begin with is that we're angry. And I've done a lot of work on getting underneath angry to grief. Mm-hmm. I am Opeyemi mother to Annalise and Jade, and grandmother or Nana to Margaret, Jean, and Theodore William. Mm-hmm. I am the daughter of Alfredine, and she is the daughter of Emmy Alexander. And she is the daughter of Julie Alexander, and she is the daughter of Savannah Curry. So my great-great-grandmother was born in slavery. And I like to start there because I think it's really important to ground a piece of this with how recent all of this really is. My great-great-grandmother was born a slave. My granddaughter can pass for white. And this is one of the years that I just got this big, huge epiphany on the decolonizing the mind and what we call internalized depression. And I recognized that somewhere along the line, I got a really deep message of what was going to be the best way to stay safe and alive as a Black woman, sexy, powerful, intelligent, because otherwise you'll get killed. That was the internal message that I got, was you'll get killed. So of course the safest thing is to get as white as you can. And I think of all the other cultures that might have gotten that message too, that are represented by those of you out there. And I often will be in situations where I want to ask people, so when did your people become white? I know what happened to my people, but if you're Jewish, there's a certain time and when you changed your names and got the nose jobs. My daughter married into a Jewish family where nose jobs were happening 2 generations back. That's dangerous. That's life-threatening. Okay, I look at my life as 6 words. That I am a eco-feminist, bohemian, refugee from Negroland. And I like to talk about those words backwards because I chose them with a lot of care. So Negroland. In African American culture where I was raised, there is a class consciousness that was written about by a woman named Margot Jefferson. She's a Pulitzer Prize winner who wrote for the New York Times. And this book is her personal memoir. And it's the closest I've come to actually seeing myself in literature, raised to be the people who bring the race up. It's called, in W.E.B. Du Bois' language, the talented 10th. So there's an internal narrative that I was raised with, that you do what you do so you can turn around and pull other people of your own race up. And there's also this subtle message that only 10% of us are really smart enough to do this. And it's a meritocracy issue that I think goes beyond African American upwardly mobile culture. So Negroland, I was raised, if anybody gets to listen to Mickey, I'm just going to plug into what Mickey said, because we're both really unusual people, but we were on opposite ends of the country. She was out in Los Angeles with Mercedes-Benz relatives. I was in Washington, D.C. with senators and sons of Supreme Court justices, and that's how I was raised and where I went to school. My parents moved to an integrated neighborhood when I was in 5th grade from a Black neighborhood in Washington, D.C., but we were the ones on top. So we moved into a neighborhood where the white people were fleeing, but they were lower class white people, and Prince George's County was just opening up to middle class Black people. And there were a lot of us because the government had to integrate the post office and integrated the military. So there were a lot of us from Washington, D.C., and it remains one of the top 2 places for Black people to live. So what happened was that stabilized a declining neighborhood, and it was none of that redlining and all that stuff happened for the 20 years of my halcyon youth. In Negroland, you go to places like Mount Holyoke College. So I went to a 7 Sisters college, and I went to what's called in Black culture, the Mecca, which is Howard University for medical school. I did not graduate from Howard University because that other identity I talked about, refugee, I choose the word refugee because Waban Shire talks about you don't leave home unless you absolutely have to. So I have felt like a refugee because Negroland was never my home, and I had to flee it because my parents were never at home in Negroland. They were the right class, but they were fucking bohemians. My dad was, I understand now, probably a pretty bisexual kind of guy. I can say that. He's dead. He's been dead for 2 years. And that he had a lot of pressure to marry, that he had plans and ideas, and he was a theater major, and then he was a master's in fine arts at Case Western Reserve. My parents met at one of the 3 places you could be an actor and get on stage and be something other than a butler or a chauffeur in a play, and that's Karamu, which means meeting house in Swahili. And it was a settlement house in the 1930s that when the neighborhood changed and Black people came in, the white progressive couple that were the settlement house coordinators didn't flee as well, and they started a whole place for African American theater and music and jazz and dance. And there was one place like that in Los Angeles, and there was one place like that in New York. And that was it. Wow. So they met there, and my father got a teaching position at Howard University, where he had gone to school. So I had this bizarre upbringing of a very stable environment with a steady income from my dad, and my mom was a working mother. But they were theater people, and anybody who knows theater knows that that's really unusual to have stable income like that. We had a lot of tensions and strangeness in our house over money, always. I don't feel like I was taught very well about money. And Refugee also, because every one of these choices that I'm choosing has this bohemian edge to it. So, all right, my parents were artists. I wanted to be a doctor. Did I want to be a doctor because I really wanted to be a doctor? I think I wanted to be a doctor because I recognized I wanted to be a healer, and the only words I really knew were doctor. And nobody said to me, "Oh, you mean a nurse?" In my family, nobody said, "Oh, you mean a nurse?" What they said was, "Oh, really?" So I didn't get a lot of reward for this left brain biochemistry major person that I was. And as an adult, I realized all my aunts were science majors. My mother was the only bohemian, and I had 3 aunts who in the 1940s all graduated from college as science majors. One of them was a chemistry major. She has a very sad and complicated story because she was dead by 21, and it was a violent act. And that's another thing that I think is an important part of my life, is how recently the violence has been in my family. There was my mother's generation where somebody was killed at age 21. And justice was not served in the larger way you look at justice. Black on black crime, which is what this is, wasn't treated so well in the 1940s. And my mother was 11 years old when that happened. And I think it had a really bad effect on her family. A bohemian is described as a socially unconventional person, especially one involved in the arts. So in my house, we had cast parties all the time. And my parents' friends were an integrated group of people with a lot of Jews I came to know. I thought I was looking at white people. I was looking at Jewish people in Washington, D.C. There is a difference. I found out when I got to college, and I was with really white people, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant people. But my upbringing had a lot of same-sex couples in it, and just really strange people in my house pretty much all the time. So when I found, and I'm speaking here to who's on the call, ecstatic dance in the Dance New England community about 25 years ago. It was like going to a big cast party. and I mean, it felt very familiar. And I happened to arrive the year that a white camper had 25 years ago tried to have a dialogue about race, and she named it something like "For Whites Only," and all hell broke loose at camp. So I was in the second week, and people were so nice to me in this community. I was just, wow, everybody wants to talk to me. And it was partially influenced by this thing that had just happened. Another thing that happened the first year I joined that community was, and I say this because of the next word I want to go to, which is eco-feminist, which was that at one of the fire circles in the first week, the people who had been learning, the white people who had been learning all these Orisha chants, which is the songs that you use to bring in spirit, and the drumming rhythms from the Afro-Cuban tradition, all at the fire circle, something happened that freaked out people. I wasn't there. My brother just told me about it. It freaked people out, and in the language of my pagan community, it would be that something happened to them, and they had an altered state of consciousness, and they were rolling around on the ground and speaking in tongues or doing strange things. So people got really freaked. And that brings me to the eco-feminist word, which is my code for witch, W-I-T-C-H. My spirituality has been heavily, heavily influenced by as a mother, trying to have a moral tradition for my children and deciding that the Unitarian Universalist would be a good place to have some kind of grounding. Going to a 400-person women's retreat at Lake Geneva, having this keynote speaker, a woman named Starhawk, march everybody up to the top of this hill, do a dance under the full moon on Earth Day. And she said, sometimes if you really listen, you'll hear the earth and the earth will talk to you. And sometimes it says important things. And she talks like that. So she has a little voice. So when the dance was over and the trancing had happened, something happened to me that I couldn't explain. And it took me on a great adventure that I'm still on, where I listen for guidance and I look at where I need to go. And that has all been since 2005. In 2005, I made a suicide attempt. Doctors don't usually fail at suicide. So there's another one of those, It was a serious attempt. It wasn't, a gesture. I had the right amount of drugs. I did everything right. So I had immediately after a moment of intense despair, horrible emotional exhaustion and fatigue, a miracle in my world, which shifted my thinking pretty dramatically, took me out of medicine over the next 2 years as the medical system really went after me. It was almost as if I had been under the radar for 20 years doing some really progressive things. I was doing home births with people. I was doing home abortions with people. I did my own abortions on my own patients as a family practice doctor. I got really clear that women's health was an issue. I did not get so clear how bad healthcare was for Blacks. I took a year off between going to college and starting medical school because of what I found when I did a thesis on how bad things really were for Black people in this country relative to how we're viewed as patients by our doctors. I found something unexpected, which was Black people didn't want to go to Black doctors. Middle-class Black people didn't want to go to Black doctors. So there's an internalized oppression there that I didn't know about. And as I said, for years, I really looked at it through the lens of a feminist. And when I got pilloried and kind of called out as inappropriate in my medical practice after the fact as a way to push me out, and then it wasn't really about pushing me out, it was just, well, if you just put the collar on that we tell you to put on, we'll let you in. And it wasn't that either. There was a 2-year period of me talking with the Board of Registration in Medicine about whether I was going to practice or not on a process that usually takes 3 months. 2 years. And my lawyer, who was very much a sort of John F. Kennedy Irish Catholic guy, you could just see how devastated he was because he'd never seen anything like this. And he didn't quite know what to do. And by the time they were ready to allow me to practice, it was pretty clear that they were kind of trying to set pawns up to close down another man's practice. I would have been working for another doctor in a very interesting way that would have allowed me to sort of subspecialize in gynae psychiatry. And this is back in 2005. So in 2005, I had an opportunity to go in a different direction and decided no. Welcome back, Anne. She's a picture of her, but she's not moving around too much. Okay. Personally, I feel that there have been 3 times in my life where my culture with 3 Ks tried to kill me. And the second time was that suicide attempt. I was doing it to myself, but when I look at the pressures I was under and the things that I was not trying to do, but actually succeeding in doing. I was a divorced mom. I lived in a very unusual way, in a kind of hippie commune way, with lots of support in some ways and not enough support in other ways. I'm raising biracial children who look white. My daughter pulled temper tantrums when she was 2, and I realized, oh my God, white people are coming to her aid as if I'm the nanny in this Cincinnati community, and we've got to figure this out. When she got to be 11, we had another talk about, you're a biracial kid, you got black blood in you, you do not need to do what the white girls are doing and separate from your mom. You know, culturally, we do it a little differently. You don't have to do that. And she kind of hung in there until she was 14 and then, you know, went away a little bit differently. The first time I feel like I almost got killed is a bit of a Serena Williams story, because you would think that I, as a physician, would get excellent care, but I almost died giving birth to my daughter. I was in a Cincinnati hospital. I had preeclampsia, which is your blood pressure going up, 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 up. And usually delivering the baby is the treatment. So they delivered my baby, but my blood pressure didn't go down. And it didn't go down for the next day or two. And I started to have signs that I was about to have a seizure after the baby had been delivered. And I'm a doctor watching all of this and saying, wait a minute, wasn't that 2 beats of clonus my hand just did? I had a really unpleasant experience of having to pump my breast milk and throw it away because of the drugs I was on that were keeping me alive and keeping me from having a seizure. Now that we are talking about stress Black women are under, there's statistics that say that we are all, no matter what class we are, having more problems with our pregnancies and more issues after the birth of the baby. The woman who figured this all out most recently died when her baby was 18 months old. No, it wasn't that. It might have been 18. It was early, and she herself died. So that was the first time. Nobody could tell what had happened, but I can tell you as a provider of alternative care now that the stress of having a nurse come in my room with my baby in her arm and have me read the thing 3 times before she would give me my baby, because my baby looked white. Those are the kinds of things that you don't think about that were going on. So as I pull myself together, the third time was trying to get out of here after Trump and moving to Canada. And I got stopped at the border and I couldn't get across the border to Canada. And this is a really interesting one. The reason that I couldn't get across was I was red flagged as somebody who was married to a Canadian, which I am. And I was going to live with him. But we had talked to an immigration lawyer less than 3 months earlier, and the laws had, the amount of surveillance that was happening at the Canadian border had shifted that much since Trump was elected, that people were being scrutinized in order of Haitians first, Africans next, African Americans next, and I have an African name that puts me up in the top 3, brown, Hispanic language, Spanish-speaking people, and then the Muslims. So that was what was going on when I tried to get through on the East Coast, and then I tried to get through on the West Coast. And then I went and just stayed in the Pacific Northwest in a very interesting way, doing wolfing on a farm. Leaving medicine, the next thing I wanted was more balance in my life. So I looked to the social services still and became a peer support for people like me who had any kind of mental health issues or wanted to identify as needing more care than they were getting. Caretaking the caregivers, like somebody else has said recently, is a really big part of what I want to do in my life. And I'm finding that right now, what's really important to me are 3 aspects of that eco-feminist identity. Which kind of doctor do I want to be now? I want to be somebody who educates people about how complicated the conventional medical system has been, how much damage it's done to all people. And yes, there are levels of damage, and people of color have been damaged more than white people, but you guys haven't gotten it so great either with some of the care that's coming out of a guild, GUILD, a guild, medical guild. Second thing that I like to talk about a lot is how spirituality, however you define it, what you look for to make meaning of crisis and tough situations. My personal life, that burst open for me with my suicide attempt, which I see as a spiritual emerge and see. And that in the language of the urban bliss shaman, you know, I had my own shamanic experience. It's humbling. You know, there's does everybody know Alex Gray? Can you just twinkle your fingers on Alex Gray? Okay, a visual artist has a triptych that I'll put a link to that has the wounded healer. And, you know, in the middle one, they're just blown apart. Their DNA's over here. And I think that there's something to that having happened to me, and me swinging like a pendulum from a conventional medical person to a very interested in social services and in mysticism person. And now as I hit 62 and am taking my retirement benefits, which I didn't think would still be there by the time I was ready to retire, I find that my choice to be voluntarily simple and have less money has finally matched my tax resistance, where I had to outlast the IRS and be uncollectible. And now I can live on this uncollectible amount, and I can do my tax resistance the way I did and not be punished for it anymore. And I just found all this out in a hearing on Monday. Wow. So this is really good timing for me to be able to say, maybe I can do some of the things that I get passionate about, which haven't always lined up with work that gives me income. The first time I had to, as a doctor, with my intellectual, my intellect was the property of the Board of Registration in Medicine. They didn't want me to use my brain for anything related to medicine. Don't practice medicine till we figure out your license. While I was doing that, I was cleaning houses. And I was in a friend's house, and I had this horrible feeling that this was the first time I was where I was expected to be, when her kids walked by and went upstairs. You know, every time I had the white suit, you know, the white coat on and the stethoscope, somebody was saying, "You're not a doctor. You're not a doctor." But when I was scrubbing the floor, nobody questioned what I was doing. And what I do now is also very humbling but powerful work, because I do personal care attendant work. That's my bread and butter work right now, with an autistic child daily, and then with a woman with MS twice a week. It brings in the income. We have very interesting connections. And I think, is there anything else? Yeah, I just wanted to say that when I came to look at the spirituality piece, there's a community called the Earth Spirit Community, and they were very, very open to me. But when I did their spells and their magic work and their trance work, all this African stuff was coming through. Seriously. So I don't know what that means as far as legacy patterns and ancestors, but I'm doing Celtic traditional ceremonies, and the Egyptian goddess Sekhmet shows up. I didn't even know who she was. And, you know, dark black guy with sort of dreadlocks, which is a African Ifa. His name is Obatala. I mean, like I'm doing all these things that I don't really have words for, but I'm hoping, since I do write, that I get to write at this next stage of my life and write about what I'm doing, that I get to brag about my lifestyle as a solo polyamorist. I'm marching in the Pride Parade this weekend. There's a poly group that's going to march in the parade, and that lifestyle has worked for me for about 15 years with steady people in my life that nobody knows about, because it's a quiet out life. It's a very quiet out life. I did a lot of Tantra along the way. I used to have erotic retreats of 15 to 20 people. When Trump got in, I recognized things aren't only bad, but there really, really is fascism rising in America. And it scared me enough to want to leave. So when I got bounced back, I have to do that thing I spoke about at the beginning, which is if I want to just follow whichever way I'm supposed to go, I have to be discerning. And the Quakers helped me with that language. I looked for a Christian community that looked like it was walking its talk, and I went to the Quakers in 2003. I don't think the Quakers are walking their talk, but I went to them in 2003 as the best I could find. And it was interesting to know their history and how they had done a lot of work with abolition. And the last thing I want to say on closing my piece is there's something about New England and white women and Black women in New England. And I feel like I got to find a little piece of what's wrong between us. Mm. It's in Joy DeGrew's post-traumatic slave syndrome video that I'll link people to. It's a 90-minute video. I feel like the cognitive dissonance that was described in that video on what it takes to cultivate a white supremacist mind hit white women in a really unique way, because in the South, this is a spoiler alert for the video, but you don't want to be surprised by this like I was. They passed laws that allowed you to beat a slave to death. They had to pass those laws because these good Christian people could not hold that they were beating people to death. And the people who were beating other people to death the most were white women beating to death Black children. So I'm just going to let people sit with that just for, 10 seconds. And in New England, we pride ourselves on abolitionism. And I just had this vision of some poor slave woman horribly tortured and raped and pillaged and her children beaten, and trying to just connect to her white abolitionist hostess and having that hostess say, oh, that can't be true. Oh, that can't be true. Oh, that can't be true. I'll stop there because I think there's lots to talk about. Yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Opeyemi, for sharing all of that. And I'm sure there's so much more you could have shared. And I'm just really moved by your clarity and the dignity which you're sharing all of that so deeply with us, and how I can feel that touching in so deeply.
Thank you.
To my body.
Thank you. We're going to lighten it up because it's heavy. You'll know this song. We're stepping into clarity and walking in our power. We're dancing magic in our lives every day and every hour. We're choosing to be using the gifts we've got to make this world so fine. We are each unique expressions of the great divine.
That's a good reminder of that song. So Anne, please share with us.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Now we can.
Yeah, we got you off mute.
Oh, that was beautiful. The parts of it that I've heard, Opeyemi, so raw and honest, and this is what we need. It's not easy, as you say, to bear it sometimes, to even hear it. This is what I have been working on, even from my Facebook pages and so forth. But I think people are becoming much more aware that, like, putting our head in the sand and pretending that it's not there isn't going to make it go away, which is what we have been doing for all these times, is trying to avoid the unavoidable. We cannot just want the beauty and the nice parts, or what we call going towards the light, without going through the shadows. It's impossible to get there with all of this weight carrying going forward, you know. And so I am so happy that you were able to touch on those sensitive spots. You know, my heart has been a place where I carried a lot of, I'm an empath by nature, and I could feel the vibration of things. And my very, very first, you could, if you want to call it awakening time, I was taken back into time, and I was shown all all these stuff that is going on, you know, and I have been kind of covered over and people not wanting to face. And it was very painful when I saw it and when I came to see it. And I realized that I cannot keep living with blinders on my face, even though that the instinctual thing for me to do would be to run away in the other direction, like Jonah running straight to the belly of the whale in the Bible. But, you know, I had to make a decision. I had to make a choice. Is that either I be fake, pretend, be pretensive, or I could walk as an authentic being, you know. And the truth of the matter is to be authentic. I get the sense that sometimes we feel we could fake our way to enlightenment, but there's no way to do that. We have to do the work. And for people who is putting out information outside there, like it's all
Uh-oh.
Oops, she's frozen for a moment. Let's see.
The technical difficulties.
Yeah. Yeah, I do like watching her dress though. But Let's see. Oh, is she back yet? No. Well, I wonder if I don't know if there's enough for you to respond to there, really.
Well, Anne was talking about being authentic, and I think that in a conversation about health and wellness, there were so many ways that I found my body was trying to tell me things I needed to do that I was not paying attention to. One of the biggest ones was just kidney stones. In my family, there are kidney problems, but in traditional Chinese medicine and in energetic medicine, kidneys often represent a place of a lot of fear. And my mother died at age 56 of things related to renal health. My grandfather died of uremic poisoning related to renal or kidney health. And I wonder, because there's definitely this idea of high blood pressure being a problem, but it's like, do you naturally have high blood pressure, or is every time you have to deal with 15 more stressors than the person who's right next to you, is that affecting your health? So to be authentic means being intimidating a lot of times. For me, it has meant, as a woman who always in medicine, if I'm going to do this, I have to be as good as those male doctors. And the worst part was I was in that age where we felt like we had to be twice as good. So women physicians a little older than me had a reputation of being cold because you just weren't allowed to bring all this, all of it. You weren't allowed to bring your whole self in. As a Black woman, anger, and tone policing down has always been where I found I could not be authentic. And yet I'm perceived as angry and pissed off and hurt. And I'm feeling like I'm not even being authentic. So I'm perceived as angry, and you're probably getting a third of what I'm really feeling. Wow, that's a big one. That I'm in a Sojourner Truth. Somebody else just did, Prakash, I think you did a Truth School workshop. I'm in a Women of Color Leadership forum that's 6 months long, and we're going into our 5th month together in the Sojourner Truth School. Some of us have never been in a room with 20 other women of color from small white communities. It's a new phenomenon, and I have to say, I don't feel honored to have carried this particular torch, because getting to authentic is so complicated. There's a book called A Girl by the Door, and it talks about who actually integrated our school system. It was the girls. Okay, people couldn't send the boys in there, and the girls I was like the second wave of that. Ruby Bridges, everybody knows, right? The little girl with the tomato thrown against the wall and the nasty word, and the state troopers like next to her. That's what we remember. But for the next generation of 8 to 12 years, every Black woman or girl who was integrating a school was still the only one in the classroom. I was always one in the classroom. And that produces, in a stressful situation, what we call fight, flight. We all grew up with on an adrenaline response. And then along the way in our lifetime, we added freeze and recognize that people just get frozen. Well, now there's a 4th one. It's called fawning. Fawning. When you're in a situation, you're the oppressed person. There's only a belly up posture that you can take to stay safe. So I look at times in my life where the fawning is a smile when other things are going on that are churning up your insides and making you unhealthy. So that translates to all of us thinking about when you swallow things instead of being honest with them, and how that can affect our health.
Looks like we actually lost Anne.
Oh,
unfortunately again. Yeah, technical difficulties are challenging, but yeah. I mean, I can personally relate to some of that too, and I haven't heard of the fawning specifically.
Yeah,
but I do wonder, like, the different experiences of trauma and sexual abuse. For me personally, that was in my lineage, and my mom's Polish, and it was all her grandparents who came from Poland, who were very poor, and I don't know a lot about their background either, but there's just this, like, we don't belong kind of feeling in that as well, and how we all have these different ancestries and backgrounds that maybe totally clash with each other completely. And talking about your children and their experiences being mixed race, who can pass as white, and yet what they're dealing with in their bodies all the time as well, and how to support them and all of us to understand that we are dealing with this too, and that people of color are facing so much from the outside in as well.
And Prakash mentioned being the father or grandfather to so many brown boys. I think you said grandfather, right? Well, as the mother of a slightly brown boy, one of the times where I got to see the biracial privilege paid off, they spent 3 months in jail due to really complicated circumstances, but essentially had a mental health crisis that was poorly handled. But because they were picked up from their white uncle's suburban home in Lexington, Kentucky, they're alive. Wow. I mean, I really believe they are alive because they were picked up and categorized as white, not mixed or Black. Their encounter with 2 police officers involved being put in the back of a police car with their hands handcuffed behind their back. When the police went to open the door, they had gotten their handcuffs to the front. All right. I think that's when the police would have shot at a Black man. Instead, they just tased him. They just tased him. I'm trying to say that this is a broken system. And whether I'm saying, thank God my brown boy was miscategorized, I'm still saying that the mental health system sucks if anybody has to worry that somebody who's unstable of mind might end up dead because our system doesn't have good policing, but also good services in other areas as well.
And how to know that, right?
Yeah, how to know that. And everybody white is starting to hear about the talk. This is like the code for your kids have to behave a certain way. And if you're a brown or a black boy in this country, if you don't behave that way, you could die, but you could die anyway. So what does that do to people's longevity planning and their thinking and their ideas about what the world is what the future looks like?
Wow. Well, I have a lot of questions and like which direction to take it. We have a lot of time for people to ask their questions as well. So I invite you all to sit with what this is bringing up for you and what you're processing around it and what you would like Opeyemi to respond to as well. And hopefully Anne will come back on. We were talking a little bit about this earlier, but I'm really interested as someone who is a ceremonialist and who I've encountered indigenous cultures in my lifetime and lived with people who are indigenous and had a nanny who was indigenous when I was very young in Taiwan and taught me her language. And I was learning that alongside English. And I didn't want to learn English, supposedly, my parents were saying. And then we left and there was no kind of like, well, we can reconnect with this woman. She was just out of my life completely. And my parents just saw her as the nanny. And so, my journey of coming back to Buddhism in my teens and then into being in Thailand and living with indigenous people and starting to meditate and open up my own container and what I'd stuffed down for so many years with a father who's British and 82, so like old school British, and a mother who was very strong, became a lawyer. I went to divinity school. I was waking up everything and I was dancing and I was doing yoga and meditating, but I really wanted to bring these worlds together. And so it's been 15 years of me trying to figure out how to do that. And I feel like I have enough container and space within that I can bring some wisdom into the hospital and also go back into a job where I am in a 9-to-5. I have a lot of responsibility and I'm, getting paid and getting supported to be myself as well. And getting to be in a process where I'm looking at what is the structure that's here and how can I work with that structure, and being very clear about my needs and direct with the people who are my supervisors about that as well. So this is kind of personal, but I'm wanting to bring in ceremony and wanting to bring in the wholeness of my own very eclectic spiritual background that includes Tantra as well, from an Eastern and a Western perspective. And just like, what advice would you give me or anyone who's trying to really bridge these worlds of full embodiment?
This is such a great time to be having this conversation. I'm 62. How old are you?
I'm 35.
Okay, half my age. And the promise for you is wonderful. And I also want to caution people half my age, because when I was that age, I too was convinced I could handle the system, and I could, but you have to keep checking in, and I needed way more care taking the caregivers connection. I went back to the man who was sort of in charge of how are you doing for a corporate agency that's not the board of registration. I went back to him 15 years later. I went back a couple of weeks ago. They still don't have anything to support physicians in Western Mass. What I did was drove to Boston for once a month while I was recovering and figuring out what I wanted to do. I drove once a month to Boston for the once a month meeting they had for behavioral issues for doctors. Okay. 3/4 of the doctors are getting helped because they have drug issues. Okay. Only 1/4 have any kind of mental health issues. And as I said, doctors don't survive suicide. So I was saying to Hillary, it was when I worked in the women's prison that I really had to put in daily practices that kept me sane and balanced. And that the more you decolonize your mind and really look at what am I doing and why am I doing it, I believe the crazier it can make you in the short run, like a homeopathic healing crisis, but that if you have community support, we can get through. I think it's really important not to get gaslighted. As a Black woman, I think my sensitivity to gaslighting is higher than many of my white friends who are just starting to use that term. Does everybody here know that term? Okay. Because sometimes I'm not sure where we are.
I would explain it just because you don't know who's going to be watching.
Yeah, so it's actually, you can go back and find this old movie from the 1940s, but the term refers to people's truth being denied or manipulated by somebody else. Sometimes it's used for non-deliberate, but usually it's deliberate manipulation away from what the person's truth is and what their authenticity is, to gaslight somebody. So 32-5-7 has lots of power and centeredness to it, and women's issues are on the front burner, and issues of Indigenous people are coming forward, and hospitals remain, to me, one of the saddest places outside of prisons that we have. So certainly Hillary's care is needed in a hospital. And where race comes in, it's really, really tricky, is one of the same places where sex comes in. Women there's certain expectations of how women behave around ill people. We're the caretakers. We're the ones that tend and befriend. There's certain expectations of how men behave around the sick. They're the EMTs. They're pounding on their chest. They're heroes, right? And for me as a Black woman, it was really challenging to recognize how much race was projected onto me as either the mammy in the situation that's the all wonderful, tell me anything. I had really good relationships with white men in their 50s. I'm serious, as a doctor. Young Black women looked up to me and thought I was wonderful, but had no idea how to get from here to there. And the other groups were challenging in all kinds of interesting ways. I really feel good about what I did as a doctor because I got some of the most unusual populations coming to me. So I feel like I did what I was supposed to do, which was to be available to anybody. So when I was in Illinois, I'm working with Amish people. It's like, you've got to be kidding me. What do you mean they want me to have a clinic, an hour down from where you are? I said, they must be talking about somebody else. No, they want the Black English lady. So among the Pennsylvania Dutch, anybody who's not Pennsylvania Dutch is English. So they wanted the Black English lady because I had supported them having home births and doing things their own way. I listened to them when they came in and wasn't just like patronizing. So, I hope you can be a light in a horribly challenging environment. Think about what you need to heal. And I always give people this little thing. Drugs are like they're about 4th or 5th on a list of what people around the world do when somebody's ill. Like the 4th or 5th thing is to give them pills. The number 1 thing is sound. We sing to them, we pray over them, we chant, Number 2 is we put them in special places, like a hospital. But it's not a pretty place. I'd rather be home in my bed at school with, you know, when you get your chicken soup from your mom, that's still a special place. It's your bedroom, right? We don't think so much in this culture about the sensuality and the aesthetic beauty of where you might want to heal and how you might want to heal. So I had a wonderful teacher, an African woman named Sobonfu Some. Rest in peace. She died on the day Trump was inaugurated. Yeah, she went home and died in her own country. But she was sent by her people to help calm us first worlders down and take some of the fire out of how we were setting fire to everything around the world. And she specifically commented on the emptiness of our wombs. Our wombs being damaged, you know, as women. She did a lot of work on relationships between men and women and how we Westerners did not know how to be a couple. In a Dagara couple, once a week, you sit down in the middle of a field, you put a circle of ash around you, you sit back to back, and you scream and holler to your ancestors all the horrible things that your partner's been doing to you all week. Okay, then you take a gourd and you pour water over each other's head and you go, you know, about your business. So, I mean, just imagine if you were a married couple or an unmarried couple, and once a week in your partner's presence, but not directly to them. You get to tell, you know, like it's like a co-counseling session that you're doing with. Yeah,
some with the divine.
Yes,
right?
with the divine. Yeah. So it was. There's so many things that I've picked up at the edges of conventional medicine, and I hope you're able to do things in a hospital setting, because I do believe that when you're on the right path, things do open up for you, and the next step will come.
Yeah, I trust that completely.
Yeah.
I just feel really grateful. I feel like I'm receiving a transmission from you and your experience, and that what you received in your journey of all this wisdom through being in very, very different communities. And I'm seeing that, and like receiving this African wisdom through being in a pagan, like white community, and how powerful that is for them and for you, and for that story to be shared more. And
how powerful it was at the time when Earth spirits started to become, I'm going to say, more insular. It was like watching the indigenous people at rites, R-I-T-E-S, or rights, R-I-G-H-T-S. Jimmy Two Feathers talked about this one. We're all overlapping on these talks, so go look at some of the other talks. But Jimmy talked about Morwen being at this event. I was in the room with the event he was talking about, and Morwen really got dissed by this Native woman who was too angry to be in this circle yet. And I think it's fair to say sometimes it's just too soon. And in this particular case, there was too much money being made, too much cultural appropriation. And the white people who said they wanted to talk about this 25 years ago weren't ready to talk about this. They wanted to be given permission to continue doing what they were doing. And they didn't get it in this weekend retreat. On the sidelines are Malidoma Some and Sobonfu Some waving their hands saying, we're ready to give this stuff away. If anybody wants some indigenous, our people sent us here to give it to you. You don't have to argue about who's qualified to do the sweat or who's allowed to share their Lakota knowledge. Our Dagara elders told us to come and help you.
And they came to the dance community.
Yes.
And literally at this retreat center called Nine Mountain that many people know, they were going for years. They were coming there and teaching their traditions to people there. So it's, you know, in the blood of that community.
And in the community represented by the people on this call, there are questions, as Jimmy referred to, you know, of cultural appropriation. But in our community, for me, it's been how willing we are to dance to music of Black people and to world music. But to actually be with those people is a little more challenging. And when we've had representatives of those communities in our community, it's always a better experience for me. but people don't want to be grilled on their vacation, right?
Yeah.
So if there's only 3 people of any color other than white in a community of 12, you don't get to ask me all the questions all weekend, you know, just because you haven't had a chance to do this before. And that's a really tricky piece right now. People want to learn and they want to know, but how we ask each other permission and whether we're stepping on each other's toes can be really complicated.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you for
Yeah.
being so willing to share all of this.
But it's because it's 25 years and somebody finally asked. So this is what's really nice. And I really wanted to say that whole piece of, oh, you're intimidating and you're scary and I'm kind of fascinated. And how do you live the way you do? Because that's been a postdoctor question a lot. How are you living the way you do? And I have to say, the stress of what people's expectations and what people are projecting on me is way bigger than whether I was on food stamps 1 year or not, and whether I have to borrow money or not. It's the perceptions that are bigger than the actual life experience. So as I continue to really get clear on where I feel comfortable with who I am, and I compare it to the rest of the world, that's the big one, is somebody said to me, I couldn't live off of my Social Security retirement benefits. They're not enough, you know. Well, around the world, what Americans have compared to the rest of the world is a powerful thing for me. And it was the Quaker community that seems to talk the most about voluntary simplistic living, but I don't see Quakers actually doing voluntary simplistic living. Does anybody remember Wally and Juanita Nelson? So Prakash is nodding his head. There was a Black couple out in Western Mass that modeled voluntary simplistic living. They grew 70% of their own food. They homesteaded on Quaker land that, you know, they didn't have to pay taxes. Hello, Anne. And one white couple did something similar. That was Randy Keeler and his wife. And they got into a lot of trouble and had their home taken away. So there's a tradition of war tax resistors in Western Massachusetts, is what I'm trying to say. But what I saw or experienced was a Black couple really walking their talk, and a lot of other people trying to figure out how low they could go, but feeling like they couldn't really go down that much because there's too much to give up. That's the decolonized mind piece, I believe. That's where it gets really hard, you know, is to walk our talk on a lot of this. What is enough?
Yeah. Community can help. Living in community, definitely. And like cooperative living. Like, we didn't talk about that with Mickey, but Mickey does live in a co-op as well. And that was my entry to all of this, was living in co-ops and waking up to how that can support simplicity.
You know, I have many friends from brown cultures that are not US cultures, and just how people live on top of each other is interesting. Sharing a bed. You know, I was recently somewhere where another woman who was not Black was not comfortable sharing a bed with me. And I go down to a friend in New York and we're all in the same bed. And, you know, there's like a bunk bed in one side of the room. And, you know, because life is tighter and there's less space. And also the idea of apartments. Wow, I just keep thinking apartments. Apartments. And that's really what they were at first, was, you know, you had your own little bathroom, your own little kitchen. I have really enjoyed shared housing situations as a single woman. If I'm sick, it's nice to be in a house where there's somebody else in the house. You know, I used to ask people all the time, who gets you your chicken noodle soup when you're sick? It's such a great opportunity to see what a person has for resources. And I can't tell you how many people would cry when I would say that. You know, that's a certain kind of isolation. It's really hard.
Yeah. Well, sorry you missed time with us.
I am
And
so sorry. I'm so sorry. My device is just like going.
All of our devices,
And
right?
you know what?
All of our devices.
I'll blame this one on retrograde.
it is Pluto and Saturn retrograde, by the way.
Yes.
FYI. It's like it's like the prescription of those planets.
Yeah.
Yes.
So is there anything that you wanted to finish? We responded, and I look forward to you looking at the recording.
What it means to be authentic. That's kind of what we took out of what you were saying, is something about authenticity.
She might be frozen again.
Yeah.
Oh no. Well, is there anyone else that wants to share a question? Feedback question. Yeah, Jerry? Yeah.
Well, Opeyemi, thank you for sharing.
Mm-hmm.
I deeply respect your journey and your willingness to speak. From the perspective, or on the topic of mental health, and your perspective as a doctor, last week I learned that there are a number of mental health issues that arise out of the white supremacists, the shit stem that we're not even aware of, that it's so hidden. And the thing that I learned about was, particularly for men of African descent, they live a life where they're chronically undertouched,
Mm-hmm.
where they've been cast as, dangerous and evil. And from a young age, people stop touching them. And that creates, a disconnect for them in their relationship to other people and themselves and stuff. So that really blew my mind and brought me into this much deeper, compassion for what that must feel like, or really helped me to sort of sense what that dysfunction does,
Mm-hmm.
and how society creates that dysfunction, and how I would never even saw that or thought of that. And so I'm wondering if there's other things that maybe you know about that are like that are so invisible, but really have, that kind of an impact that, could help reveal to me like more about these kind of systemic issues that create, either emotional health issues or mental health issues that are affecting people of African descent or people who are non-white. I'll let you answer. Thank you.
Okay. Having just been with a group of women of color, one of the things we named is that we believe that everywhere we go in this culture, we are considered inappropriate and dangerous. Mm-hmm. Everywhere we go. That's what we had in common, was that, and it could be subtle or it could be big, but those were the two words, inappropriate and dangerous. So I know that in my life, that has a lot of effects on being a hamster in a cage and trying to be appropriate and trying to always do it right. And like, why is it never right? Why am I always wrong, or something's always not quite going to work? Bill, if you're still there, I'm going to share. Yesterday, when I was going into the dance space, I dance my truth, and I dance in a really powerful way. And I said going in, I've been in this community 25 years, and I still am about to walk into a space where I'm afraid I'm going to do something wrong. I'm going to be tone policed, or I'm going to be the way I dance is not going to be right. That's not neurosis. That's having somebody drum over my words in a circle, sometime. It can be sexist, or it can be racist, or it can be both. And for me, it's been really important not to try to tease them apart anymore. Just say, this is my life, and I don't know whether it just happened because I'm a woman, or it happened because I'm loud, or it happened because, I had a mental health breakdown, or it happened because, I'm Black. I don't know. I just know it happened, and I don't want it to happen again. So, if we can, I think that there is a tendency right now when we find things out that are hard, we need to analyze them and figure them out. And instead of just listening and having compassion, I think growing the compassion is hard. And Bill, yesterday, I said, I would like to have you feel that my heart is pounding fast, but I don't know you well enough to have you put your hand on my chest right here. But would you just kind of keep an eye on things? And if I do something really inappropriate, we can match it up. And I mean, it wasn't anything like that, but it was the first time I really felt comfortable just asking for a witness. And that's something about community, that things are changing enough that there's enough white people out there who seem to care about what's going on for me to take more of a chance. That when I see a Black Lives Matter sign, it matters. When I was in Seattle, Washington, and I really wasn't sure where I was living, I was thinking, wow, I wish this Black Lives Matter sign was like the abolitionist movement, and it really meant I could go up to that house and knock on that door and talk to that person. But it doesn't mean that yet. But I mean, that's how big it can be in a society where I'm becoming more fearful. Anybody Jewish ought to be feeling their ethnicity a little bit more. Anybody who attends a mosque might be a little challenged. And some of the Christians, depending on where you are, things are going bonkers on religion in the world. Things are going bonkers on race in the world and ethnicity in places where you can't even, how can I tell a Northern Ireland Protestant from a Catholic? I don't know, but they know. So this conversation so quickly goes from a stone in the center out in all these ripples that have to do with honesty and vulnerability and the difficult edges. Like I said, I'm sure some white woman had to put her hands over her ears hearing about some of that. But you think somebody doesn't notice that you're putting your hands over your ears, literally or figuratively? So how do we get ready for those conversations when they're going to get hard and stay with them? I don't have answers. I'm just saying it feels like it's important next steps for us. Was that helpful? I can't speak for other people, particularly Black men, but my son, I see a lot of issues with masculinity and what does it mean to men in America right now? What does it mean to be masculine? So I do weird things to go on my adventure. So I took a Lenten adventure with, I'm not a Christian. You all can't just have them, So I had, everybody else is doing Lent in a very, penitent, almsgiving way. And I'm like, I'm going on erotic adventures with Jesus for this 40-day period. And it was really fun to really think about what is good about a figure that's an archetype of something positive. So what would my Jesus be doing? Well, he's whispering in my ear, you need to leave the Quaker meeting right now. Okay, so we'll leave the Quaker meeting right now. What would my Jesus do when I'm in the back of the Congregationalist church? Well, I would like somebody putting their hands in my hair and braiding my hair. So I have this image of kind of a more gender fluid Jesus. So, I'm just all these things that people don't think about. This person that you all are so into was 33 years old when they died. That's 2 years older than my youngest child and 2 years younger than my oldest child. So I get real personal on stories. If they're stories that people are making meaning of, then I like to kind of mess with the meaning. And people may see, I put up pictures that are edgy. I don't have any right here, but there's a beautiful Black Jesus in the Springfield Church, Bill. I think it's Wesleyan Methodist Church. And it's just like, there's a whole room of Black images of characters from the Bible. That's powerful. Places you don't even think you're influenced. you know.
Opeyemi?
Yes.
I have a question. So the work that I do is around trying to transform broken systems around sustainability and business and investment, and hoping to which are hugely influential in a negative way right now, I believe, and could have profound influence if they shifted into a more positive impact. But because I'm calling systems into question, I find that I'm often sort of questioned, like what you mentioned about gaslighting, or and so I wonder. I mean, I think you've already addressed this a lot, but how do you maintain resilience in the face of that sort of undermining of your sort of reasonableness?
Yes.
When I'm personally convinced that I'm like way more reasonable, and that, you know, we're in an emergency. And I loved how you said emerge and see. And is it okay if I use that?
Absolutely.
Because
it's not mine.
Okay, great. But you know, that we're in this emergency, I believe, in a planetary emergency, and yet when you say that, you are perceived as unreasonable. So just you know, maybe extending what you've already been saying to address that.
Okay,
Thank you.
The tools that I'm using are two. One came out of my mental health experiences, where I realized that the whole system's pretty broken. I'm an abolitionist when it comes to mental health, and the only thing I'm really seeing that's useful, I know there's a lot of self-help plans, but the one I know was the Wellness Recovery Action Plan, or WRAP. And the question I think you have to ask wherever you are is, what do I look like when I'm well? And how am I able to maintain that or get back to that? That's the resiliency, is to know what you're like when you're well, and to be able to feel when you're moving away from it and when you're way off. And this program has, you know, things that are triggers to me, things I do for my triggers, what things look like when things start to break down, when I have to give care over to somebody else because I have a history, this is not me, but I have a history of mania, and if I start to race too high, I can't make good decisions, and what are my advanced directives? Okay. So with all that in mind, death midwifery is the other place where I'm gathering skills that I think are really important for us as we face climate chaos. I'm going to say that again. Death midwifery is where I am seeing the skills we need to face climate chaos. We may not survive this sixth extinction.
Yeah.
Yep.
We can look that in the eye and grieve and look at the mystery of it all, and do what we can on that whole drawdown list. That's where we start. I have teachers who always say, look at the elephant in the middle of the room, which is grief right now. I think all of us who are feeling sensitive at all have trouble with a culture that doesn't give us outlets for grief. Hillary commented that I'm a ceremonialist. I've got great, beautiful website, but people still don't know how to connect with this kind of work. And you know, I mean, it's hard because what if you ran a grief ritual and nobody came? I mean, I went to a death cafe a week ago at the Quaker Meeting House in Western Mass, and it had 17 people there. This is new. So something is breaking through.
Yeah, I wish I could have been
There'll be more. But something is breaking through for people holding their feet to the fire on, we may not be able to look away from this. And I think this is where the connections between white America and all of the other indigenous people are promising but challenging, because you broke it. You all may have broken the planet. Who's you? You could say not me. I'm a part of this culture that may have broken the planet so badly it may not be fixable for humans. I have no doubt that the earth continues, but it may not be fixable for humans. So all of the big scientists who are doing all the drawdown work on, we've got 12 years, we've got, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, her Dream of a New Future, 7-minute inspirational video. I think these things are wonderful. And it's important for me to remember that my influence is at the 6th and the 7th top 10 things to slow climate change. It's educate the girls all over the planet, and it's give women back our reproductive health rights. And if you put 6 and 7 together, they become the number one thing that could be done to influence climate change. And solar panels are 10. When I looked at the video that had been put together, and the guy who's speaking, this white scientist, said, "Oh, educate girls. Who knew?" I talked back to the screen the way a lot of Black people do. I said, "I knew." What do you mean, who knew? Just look at where you make influence and change is giving money to women in communities. When you give money to the men spend the money. When you give money to the women put the money into their communities and the families. So these are some of the things we're going to learn from more connection to Indigenous. Being such a orphan of sorts, an orphan to the middle class, an orphan to Blackness, an orphan in white America. It has what my teachers in college talked about, cultural marginality, where people connect. So in cultural anthropology, you don't get to talk to the people who have a really deep weddedness to their culture. You get to talk to the people who are on the edges. So I'm an edge walker. I've become more of an edge walker. I'm more comfortable being an edge walker. And I hope I continue to learn to modulate my volume so I don't intimidate beautiful young people like this, so they don't come up to me for 5 years and say anything. But, we get, no, it wasn't 5 years.
Thank you. Yeah, just following up on that, one of the things that I've been perceiving in following you, you mentioned Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and what I particularly appreciate about her is that she is very vocal in when she is gaslighted, she responds immediately. She responds with very logical, reasonable, and emotional responses, and she just doesn't take any shit. And I think that is so. She's setting an example for me of being more forthright when I encounter, as a privileged white male, being marginalized because of an opinion that's contrary to the systemic status quo, and having that courage to speak up and say, no, I'm not wrong just because I'm speaking on something that's different from the status quo. So, and your voice, and Hillary, you for hosting this, and Anne is very helpful for legitimizing using your voice loudly or in modulation. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Our sage.
Thank you.
We had someone else join us. Not sure. They have a big finger. Is there anyone else who wants to share, ask a question?
Hillary?
Uh-huh.
Yes, I just wanted to say, just in case my phone do that out thing again before, because I know we only have a few minutes.
Sure, yeah.
I just want to apologize to everybody for that mishap with the device, and you know, if there's anything, I just want to thank everybody for being here, and Opeyemi, this whole conversation was really awesome.
Good.
Lots of beautiful things coming up. Not beautiful in the true sense of the word, like it's pretty, but you know, it's touching on the core of what's going on, and this is where we are going deeper and deeper every time we come together, is going from different perspective, but going deeper and deeper at the fabric of what this thing is, this monstrous thing that we none of us want to face, you know. There was a woman called she does she's called her group is called Three Sisters. I just want to touch on that quickly because Opeyemi said something before about you know, we need to express, we need to cry. I can't stress this, so this is so important. It's like everybody's walking around holding such heaviness. I think what Three Sisters, her name is Dubois, I think. Her surname is Dubois, and she was talking about when she gets into a meeting, she literally cries, and it gives people permission to let the tears flow, because so many of us are carrying so much. We need to let it go and just get into the emotions and feel and let the river flow. If we could do that a little bit, it will decompress some of this, it will free up some of this heaviness, because the whole environment is like it's constipated, you know, with all of this emotion, and we need to release. And the only way to release is by feeling our emotions. This is why mental health is such a it's so high on the list of problematic this time, because everybody's up in their head and nobody's wants to go back to the heart, you know. I'm sorry, so I'm just gonna keep it short, and because I don't know what my phone is gonna do. So if it's no disrespect on my part, it's just the device isn't working properly. So bear with me and accept my apologies. One last thing, we are the each of us, inferiority and superiority complexes are the same, it's two sides of the same coin. We all have a responsibility, whether you play in the role of inferiority or superiority. We all have a responsibility as individuals to shake it up, and we have to be the example for our lives, you know. And each one of us know where those biases are. Nobody could do it for us. It's very important at this time for us to really be, or come back to the truth of who we are, which is in the heart, and walk that road. Is where healing is going to take place from that point. I mean, we have we know what the issues are with medicine and the medical system and all of that. But the truth is, there's a lot of healing that could take place by going to the heart and asking ourselves those deep questions, forgiveness, you know, gratitude, all those things that really allow us to feel, you know, would help us to bring out and to expose some of those, I would say, poison that is running through our veins, you know, based on holding on rather than releasing. So thank you guys for all your patience and for your understanding. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Anne. We have a few more minutes if there's someone else who has anything to share or a question.
I'd like to have people really think about the things that we do. So many people on this call live are dance people. And I want to hope that whoever watches this finds ways to find that release or a path through to more authenticity in your life, and that the arts are a huge way that that happens, that I don't feel American culture honors terribly well. And therefore playing is also something that we don't do enough of. And I have, you know, all this talk about getting in touch with your inner child. For me, it's much more that I have had to develop a sense of humor. that life hasn't felt funny. It's felt hard and difficult, and like I'm the mule, you know, doing too much work. So to recognize that I make choices and that my choices have consequences, and that I need to take responsibility for those choices, and to get a sense of humor about it all at the same time is full catastrophe living straight ahead. John Kabat-Zinn had the name right, full catastrophe living, but a lot of people don't like thinking about that. Catastrophe means, in the Greek, the last act of usually a tragedy, but it's not always a tragedy. It's just a part of the play. Catastrophe is just a part of the play.
It's the death that brings the rebirth.
There we go. I like that whole cycle of life thing.
Yeah. Well, I feel so like you've spoken to so many of my deeply held beliefs, and like you're the mentor I've been waiting for. And like, oh, right here. And I just want to speak like a little bit to, I think it wasn't the first time, but it was one of the first times I met you. You came to Mandala Dance, and I was new to all of this community and new to leading dance space and ceremony and terrified. And you just jumped right in, and you did this like ceremonial theatrical thing with like a mask on, and I was like I felt like you were this being coming to me from this other planet or this other plane, being like, that's who you're gonna be. And I was like terrified.
But I had somebody like that.
Yeah.
And her name was Nechi, and she was 60 when I met her. And when I was in medical school and I had to dance every Monday night, and the only place I could find was Israeli folk dance, there was a woman in her 50s or 60s that just was the most beautiful dancer. I don't know her name. So we're going to have to be mentors for each other in a more casual guardian angel type of thing, and just show up, you know, just show up. So I'm glad I'm here. I see you.
Yeah, I'm not going to be so far away. Good. Yeah. And I'm looking forward to sharing more of your wisdom on Grace Between Races, and feel free to share any of your videos that you want to on that page.
Yeah, I will put a list that will be underneath this YouTube piece of some links to other great people that are doing other great work on racism and healthcare, particularly. And I will send links to 2 or 3 places where I just put up little postcards of interesting things that are like 3 minutes or 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you. And so in conclusion, I want to honor everyone who came here. Thank you for your time and your presence and energy.
Thank you.
And for your sharings as well, and questions and deep reflection. And I want to honor all of our guides and our guardians and benefactors who supported us to be here together, as well as all of our ancestors and those who we know and those who we don't know. Thank you. And to the land where we find ourselves, and to the ancestors of the land where we are as well. Thank you for this time and the support. And I invite us to be gentle with ourselves, with all this wisdom that we are integrating, and how we bring ourselves back out into relationship and into the world as well. And that we are going to meet again in 2 weeks. And it will be with my friend Lily Rakia Chandler, who is she is Jewish and she is Native and she is white, and she's been reaching into her Native background mostly lately, and she's learning a lot. And she's a young woman; she's around my age as well, and we've been collaborating and supporting each other and making music. And so I'm not sure what she'll be bringing as a theme yet, and I'm pretty sure it'll be something around Native Indigenous culture, and possibly a bit more about cultural appropriation as well. So that will be on the 13th of May at 6 to 8. So thank you, and I wish you all a good night, and we will post this, and feel free to post it anywhere that you would like to as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Blessings.
Hope to see you all. Thank you, Opeyemi.